The woman striding down Randsburg's dusty main street in men's trousers and boots sent a ripple of scandalized whispers through the California mining town. But Wyatt Garrison barely glanced up from where he was loading supplies onto his pack horse until he heard the venom in their voices. It was September of 1878, and the high desert settlement was still raw and rough around the edges, clinging to the eastern slopes of the Rand Mountains, where silver had been discovered just 2 years prior. The sun beat down mercilessly on the rutted street, turning the air thick and shimmering. Wyatt had come down from his claim in the mountains for provisions, his broad shoulders straining against his worn shirt, his dark hair hanging past his collar in waves that caught the desert wind. He stood well over 6 feet, his arms corded with muscle from years of swinging a pickaxe and hauling timber through mountain passes. His hands were calloused and strong, his jaw covered in several days of stubble, and his pale blue eyes held the kind of steady patience that came from living alone in the wilderness. "Look at that one," a woman in a bonnet hissed to her companion, "dressed like a man. It is unnatural." "She walks like a man," another voice added, dripping with disapproval. "No proper lady would stride about in such a fashion." Wyatt's eyes finally found the subject of their criticism. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark, honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid that hung down her back. Her face was sun-kissed and determined, her features strong rather than delicate. She wore men's trousers that were rolled at the ankles, sturdy boots caked with trail dust, and a simple cotton shirt that had seen better days. A wide-brimmed hat hung down her back by its string. She carried herself with purpose, her stride confident and unbowed by the stares and whispers that followed her like a wake. What struck Wyatt was not her clothing, but the quiet dignity in her carriage. She did not shrink from the criticism or hurry her pace. She simply walked, head high, toward the general store where Wyatt stood. As she drew closer, he could see the weariness around her eyes, the way her jaw was set with determination that barely concealed exhaustion. There was dried mud on her boots and dust coating her clothes. She had been traveling hard. "Good afternoon," she said to him as she reached the store's entrance, her voice lower than most women's but pleasant, with a hint of Eastern education beneath the tiredness. "Afternoon, miss," Wyatt replied, touching the brim of his hat. Something in her hazel eyes caught him off guard. They were intelligent and wary, like a wild creature that had learned caution through necessity. She gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement before disappearing into the store. Behind him, Wyatt heard more whispers. "Brazen as you please." Someone should tell her this is a respectable town. Wyatt felt irritation prickle along his spine. He had little patience for small-minded gossip. Living in the mountains had given him perspective on what truly mattered, and clothing did not rank high on that list. He finished securing his supplies and was about to mount his horse when raised voices from inside the store made him pause. "I will not sell to the likes of you," came the proprietor's voice, loud and self-righteous. "This is a Christian establishment. We do not serve women who have forgotten their place." "I have money," came the woman's reply, steady but with an edge of desperation. "All I need is flour, salt, and coffee. Please. You can take yourself and your shameful attire elsewhere. We do not want your kind here." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He tied his horse's reins to the post and walked into the store. The proprietor, a florid-faced man named Hutchins, stood behind his counter with arms crossed. The woman stood before him, her hands clenched at her sides. Up close, Wyatt could see the fine tremor in her fingers, the way her throat worked as she swallowed her pride. "I will take another 50 pounds of flour," Wyatt said, his deep voice cutting through the tension, "and whatever else the lady needs." Hutchins's face reddened further. "Now, Garrison, you do not want to be associated with, 'Did I ask for your opinion?'" Wyatt's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "The lady needs supplies. I am buying them, unless you want to turn away my money too." The threat hung in the air. Wyatt's cash was good, and he spent enough in this store each season that Hutchins could not afford to alienate him. The proprietor's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish before he finally nodded curtly. Fine. What do you need?" The woman turned to look at Wyatt, surprise and something else flickering across her face. Pride warred with necessity in her expression. Finally, necessity won. 20 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of salt, coffee, sugar, and bacon if you have it," she said quietly. "I will pay you back." "No need," Wyatt replied. He met her eyes. Consider it a welcome to Randsburg, such as it is." Hutchins gathered the supplies with poor grace, slamming items onto the counter. Wyatt paid without comment and helped carry the supplies outside. The woman followed, her expression unreadable. In the harsh sunlight, she looked even more worn. There were healing scratches on her hands and forearms, the kind you got from scrambling through brush. Her clothes, though clean, were patched in several places with careful, precise stitches. "Thank you," she said once they were outside, away from prying ears. "I will find a way to repay you." "What is your name?" Wyatt asked instead of responding to her promise. She hesitated, then seemed to decide he had earned at least that much. "Beatrice Lawson. Most people call me B." "Wyatt Garrison. Most people do not call me anything because I live 15 miles up in the mountains and only come to town every few weeks." He allowed himself a small smile. "Where are you headed, Miss Lawson?" "Just B, please." She glanced down the street, then back at him. "I have a claim about 8 miles northeast of here. My father left it to me when he died 6 months ago. I've been working it alone since then." That explained the trousers and the weathered appearance. No woman could work a mining claim in skirts and petticoats. Wyatt felt a flicker of respect. Mining was brutal work, even for men built for hard labor. "That is rough country," he said carefully. "Not many supplies out that way." "No," she agreed, "which is why I need to come into town occasionally, hostile reception or not." Her chin lifted slightly. "I will not abandon my claim. It is all I have left of my father, and I intend to work it properly." Wyatt studied her for a long moment. She held his gaze without flinching, though he saw the vulnerability she was trying to hide. She was alone, exhausted, and running up against the cruelty of people who valued convention over compassion. "My claim is in the same general direction," he said. "If you can wait an hour while I finish my business here, we can ride out together. These mountains are not safe to travel alone." Suspicion flickered across her face, followed by a flash of something that might have been fear. "I have managed this long on my own." "I am sure you have." Wyatt kept his voice gentle. "But there have been bandits working these hills lately. 3 prospectors got jumped last month on the Eastern Trail. I am not suggesting you cannot handle yourself. I am suggesting that 2 people are harder to ambush than 1. She considered this, her eyes searching his face for hidden motives. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "All right, 1 hour, I will water my mule at the livery. I will meet you there." Wyatt watched her walk away, still with that same confident stride that had so offended the town gossips. She walked like someone who knew her own mind and had no time for foolishness. She walked like she had somewhere to be and meant to get there under her own power. She walked right into his heart just fine, though he did not realize it yet. He finished his errands quickly, trading some silver ore for credit and picking up a few additional supplies. When he returned to the livery, he found Bee waiting beside a gray mule that looked as trail-worn as she did. Her supplies were loaded into worn saddlebags, and she had her hat on now, shading her face from the brutal sun. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They rode out of Randsburg together, leaving the whispers and judgment behind. The trail wound up into the sage-covered foothills, where the air smelled of dust and creosote bush. The September heat was oppressive, but Wyatt was used to it. He noticed Bee did not complain, just kept her mule moving at a steady pace. For the first few miles, they rode in silence. Wyatt was comfortable with quiet, and Bee seemed grateful for it. But as they climbed higher and the town disappeared behind them, she finally spoke. "Why did you help me back there?" Wyatt glanced over at her. "Did I need a reason?" "Most people have one." Her voice was matter of fact, not bitter. "Especially when they help a woman the whole town has decided is improper." "I suppose my reason is that I do not care much what the town thinks," Wyatt said. "You needed supplies, you had money to pay for them, everything else is noise." Bee was quiet for a moment. "You are not like most people I have met." "I could say the same about you." Wyatt let his horse pick its way around a cluster of rocks. "How long did you and your father work your claim?" 2 years together. He was a geologist back in Ohio. When my mother died, he decided to start over out west. I came with him." Her voice softened slightly. "He taught me everything. How to read the rocks, where to look for veins, how to work safely underground. He always said I had a good eye for it." "And after he died?" "I kept working." What else was I supposed to do? Go back east and become a seamstress? Marry some man who would take the claim and decide I should stay home like a proper wife? She shook her head. My father respected my mind. He treated me like a partner, not a decoration. I will not give that up. The passion in her voice stirred something in Wyatt's chest. He understood that fierce independence, that need to prove yourself on your own terms. It was what had driven him into the mountains 5 years ago after his own family tragedy. How about you? Bea asked, turning the conversation. How long have you been working your claim? 5 years. I came out from Montana after my parents died. Avalanche took them both in one winter. He said it simply, the old pain dulled by time but never quite gone. I needed somewhere that was not full of memories, found this mountain and decided it was far enough. I am sorry, Bea said quietly, about your parents. I'm sorry about your father. They shared a look of mutual understanding, two people who had lost everything and were trying to build something new from the wreckage. The trail grew steeper, winding through sage-covered slopes dotted with Joshua trees. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the landscape into a study of gold and brown. Wyatt kept watch on the surrounding terrain, mindful of his warning about bandits. It had not been an empty threat. These mountains attracted desperate men, and a woman traveling alone would be too tempting a target. My claim is just over that ridge, Bea said eventually, pointing to a rocky outcrop ahead. About another mile. I will see you there safely. You do not have to. I know I do not have to. Wyatt's voice was gentle but firm. I want to make sure you get home all right. Something in Bea's expression shifted, softening slightly. You are very kind. Not particularly, Wyatt replied. Just practical. If something happened to you out here, I would feel obligated to search for you, which would waste time I could be using to work my own claim. His deadpan delivery made Bea laugh, a sound that surprised them both. It was clear she did not laugh often these days. The sound transformed her face, momentarily erasing the lines of weariness and worry. Practical, she repeated, still smiling. I suppose I can appreciate that. They rode on, and Wyatt found himself reluctant to see the journey end. There was something refreshing about Bea's company. She did not chatter or simper or play games. She spoke honestly and expected honesty in return. In another life, she might have been considered too blunt, too unfeminine. Out here, it just made her real. Bea's claim was situated in a small canyon with high rock walls that provided some shelter from the wind. A modest cabin stood near the entrance, built from rough timber with a stone chimney. There was a mine entrance dug into the hillside, shored up with timber supports and various tools scattered in organized piles. It was clear that despite being alone, Bea had been maintaining the site carefully. This is well done, Wyatt said, impressed. The setup showed knowledge and skill. Your father taught you well. Thank you. Bea dismounted and began unloading her supplies. I have been trying to extend the main shaft, but it is slow going alone. My father and I always worked as a team, one digging, one hauling. Wyatt dismounted as well and helped her carry the supplies inside. The cabin was small but tidy, with a simple cot, a small stove, a table and chair, and shelves lined with tools and supplies. Everything was orderly, functional. There were a few personal touches, a photograph of a stern-looking man who must have been her father, a few books on a shelf, a wildflower and a tin cup on the table. You are doing more than surviving, Wyatt observed. You are making this work. Trying to. Bea set down the sack of flour and turned to face him. Thank you again, Mr. Garrison, for everything. The supplies, the company on the trail, not judging me for how I look. Wyatt, he corrected, and there is nothing to judge. You are dressed sensibly for your work. Anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. Bea met his eyes, and something passed between them, a moment of connection, of recognition. Two solitary people who understood each other in ways the townspeople never could. Would you like coffee before you head to your claim? Bea asked, a slight hesitation in her voice that suggested this was not an offer she made often. It is the least I can do after you helped me. Wyatt knew he should decline and head for home. The sun was already past its zenith, and he had work waiting, but he found himself nodding instead. Coffee would be good. Bea built up the fire in her stove and set water to boil, while Wyatt waited outside in the shade of the cabin. He studied the mine entrance, noting the careful shoring work and the pile of tailings that showed consistent effort. A woman working alone should not have been able to accomplish this much. It spoke to Bee's determination and skill. When she emerged with 2 tin cups of strong, bitter coffee, he accepted his gratefully. "What kind of ore are you finding?" he asked. "Silver mostly, some copper veins running through. The main vein my father found runs deep into the mountain, but I have not been able to follow it as far as I would like." She sipped her coffee. "What about you?" "Similar. Good silver deposits, though the mountain is stubborn about giving them up." He smiled slightly. "But I have time and patience, which is what you need in this work." They talked for a while about mining, about techniques and tools, about the challenges of working alone, about the geology of these particular mountains. Wyatt found himself enjoying the conversation more than any he had had in years. Bea was intelligent and knowledgeable, her questions thoughtful, and her observations sharp. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Wyatt stood. "I should head out. I have another few hours of riding ahead of me." Bea stood as well. "Thank you again, Wyatt, for everything. If you need help with anything, my claim is about 7 miles northwest of here, up past Copper Ridge." He hesitated, then added, "And if you come into town again, find me first. I make the trip every few weeks, and we might as well ride together." Surprise flickered across Bea's face, followed by something that looked like hope. "I would like that." As Wyatt rode away, he found himself looking back once to see Bea standing in front of her cabin, watching him go. Something had shifted in the space of a few hours. Some connection had been forged. He told himself it was just practical 2 neighbors looking out for each other in rough country. But he knew it was more than that. The memory of her laugh stayed with him all the way home. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Wyatt worked his claim, hauling ore and extending his shafts deeper into the mountain. It was hard, solitary work, the kind that made your back ache and your hands bleed. But he had always found satisfaction in it, in the simple equation of effort and result. Except now, his thoughts kept drifting to a canyon 7 miles away, to a woman who worked alone and walked like she knew exactly where she was going. He found excuses to ride in that direction, checking his trap lines, scouting new timber, surveying the eastern ridges. Twice, he passed close enough to Bea's claim to stop and check on her. The first time, he brought her a haunch of venison from a deer he had shot. "Thought you might appreciate some fresh meat," he said when she answered his call. Bea looked at the venison, then at him, her expression caught between gratitude and wariness. "You do not have to keep helping me." "I know." Wyatt handed over the meat, "but I shot more than I can eat before it spoils, and it seems wasteful to let it go to the coyotes." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but Bea accepted the venison with a small smile that made the long ride worthwhile. "Would you like to stay for supper?" she asked. "I'm a decent cook when I have something to work with." Wyatt stayed. They ate venison steaks and beans at her small table, while the evening light painted the canyon walls in shades of orange and purple. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from mining to books to memories of the lives they had left behind. Wyatt learned that Bea had studied literature in Ohio, that she loved Shakespeare and Whitman, that she had always felt trapped by the expectations placed on women. Her father had been unusual in encouraging her mind, in treating her as an equal. "He used to say I was smarter than half the men at the Geological Society," Bea said with a sad smile. "Of course, they would never have let me through the door, but he believed it anyway." "He was right to," Wyatt said. "You know more about mining than most men I have met." Bea looked at him across the table, something vulnerable in her eyes. "You do not find it strange that I would rather be out here digging in the dirt than back east, learning to embroider?" "I find it honest," Wyatt replied. "You are doing what matters to you, not what other people think you should do. That takes courage." The look she gave him then made something warm unfurl in his chest. It was not just attraction, though he could not deny she was beautiful in her unconventional way. It was recognition, admiration, and the beginning of something deeper. When he finally left, riding home under a canopy of stars, Wyatt admitted to himself what had been growing clear. He was falling for Beatrice Lawson, for her strength and her stubbornness and the way she faced the world without apology. It terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The second time he stopped, it was because he heard the crack of rifle fire echoing through the canyons. His blood went cold. He kicked his horse into a gallop, covering the distance to Bee's claim in record time. When he crested the ridge above her canyon, he saw 3 men on horseback near her cabin. Bee stood in her doorway with a rifle raised, and there was already 1 man on the ground, clutching his leg. Wyatt did not hesitate. He rode down into the canyon with his own rifle ready, letting out a shout that echoed off the stone walls. The bandits turned, startled, and Wyatt fired a warning shot that kicked up dust near the hooves of the nearest horse. "You have got about 3 seconds to ride out before I stop aiming to miss," Wyatt called out, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The bandits took one look at him, at his size, at the steady rifle, at the cold determination in his eyes, and apparently decided they wanted no part of this fight. They hauled their injured companion onto his horse and rode off in a cloud of dust and curses. Wyatt dismounted and ran to Bee. She was shaking now that the danger had passed, her rifle still raised. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands going to her shoulders. No, I'm fine." Her voice wavered slightly. "They wanted my supplies. When I refused, they tried to force their way inside. I shot the first one in the leg. I was not trying to kill him, just stop him." "You did exactly right." Wyatt gently took the rifle from her hands, which were trembling badly now. "You are safe now." To his surprise, Bee suddenly leaned against him, her forehead pressing against his chest. She did not cry, but he could feel the tension shaking through her body, the aftermath of terror and adrenaline. Without thinking, Wyatt wrapped his arms around her, one hand going to the back of her head. She fit against him perfectly, her strength and vulnerability balanced in that moment of trust. They stood like that for a long minute, until Bee's breathing steadied, and she stepped back, wiping at her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I am sorry," she said. "I am not usually so. You just fought off 3 armed men," Wyatt interrupted. "You are allowed to react." Bee looked up at him, and something shifted in her expression. "You came when you heard the shot." "Of course I did. You could have been killed. So could you." Wyatt reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate. "I am not going to let anything happen to you if I can help it." The words hung between them, heavier than simple neighborly concern. Bee searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her breath catch. "Wyatt," she said softly, "why are you really here?" He could have deflected, could have made another excuse about being in the area, but he was done pretending, done fighting what had become obvious to him. "Because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I met you," he said simply. "Because you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. Because when I heard that gunshot, I was more afraid than I have been in my entire life." He paused. "And because I think you might feel the same way about me." Bee's eyes widened. For a long moment she did not speak, and Wyatt wondered if he had miscalculated badly. Then she reached up and touched his face, her calloused fingers gentle against his bearded jaw. "I have been trying not to feel this," she admitted. "I have spent so long learning to be alone, to not need anyone. And then you appeared, and everything got complicated." "Complicated how?" Wyatt covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "I like you," Bee said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I like talking to you. I like how you look at me like I am a person instead of a problem to be solved. I like how safe I feel when you are near. And that terrifies me, because I cannot afford to depend on anyone." "Depending on someone is not the same as being weak," Wyatt said gently. "It is just being human." Says the man who lives alone on a mountain. Despite the tension of the moment, Wyatt smiled. "Maybe we are both learning the same lesson." Bee smiled back, tentative but real. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent electricity racing through Wyatt's entire body. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I wanted to do that," she said, almost defensively. "I'm glad you did," Wyatt replied, his voice rough. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her properly, pouring everything he felt into it, the fear he had experienced riding toward the gunfire, the relief at finding her safe, the growing love that he could no longer deny. Bee made a small sound and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with equal intensity. They stood in her dusty canyon, surrounded by sage and stone, and found in each other something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I am not going to let you stay here alone anymore," he said. "Not after this. Those men might come back with more friends." "I will not abandon my claim," Bea said immediately, the old stubbornness flaring. "I am not asking you to, but I am moving my operation down here, at least temporarily. I will set up camp nearby and we can work both claims. Together." Bea pulled back to look at him. "You would do that?" "I would do a lot more than that if you would let me," Wyatt said honestly. "Bea, I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but out here time moves differently. I know what I feel. I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I already have." Tears welled in Bea's eyes, but she was smiling. "I think I have been falling for you too. I just did not want to admit it." "Then admit it now." "I am falling in love with you, Wyatt Garrison," Bea said, her voice steady and sure, "and I would very much like you to stay." That evening, Wyatt rode back to his claim only long enough to gather supplies and make arrangements to relocate. By the time he returned to Bea's Canyon the next afternoon, he brought everything he needed to set up a proper camp. He pitched his tent a respectful distance from Bea's cabin, though he suspected that distance would not last long. They fell into a new pattern, one that felt natural and right. Wyatt spent his days working Bea's claim with her, the two of them managing in one day what would have taken her 3 days alone. His strength and her knowledge combined perfectly. She would read the rock faces and identify promising veins, and he would do the heavy excavation work. They hauled ore together, shored up tunnels together, and planned their work together. In the evenings, they cooked meals and talked for hours, learning each other's histories and dreams. Wyatt told her about growing up in Montana, about his parents' love for each other, and how their death had shattered him. Bea told him about her mother's illness, about her father's grief that had eventually become determination to start fresh. They shared their losses and found in that sharing a kind of healing. The physical attraction between them grew stronger each day. Sometimes Wyatt would catch Bea watching him as he worked, her eyes following the play of muscles in his arms and back. Sometimes she would stand close enough that he could smell the sage and sunshine scent of her hair, and it took all his willpower not to pull her into his arms right there. They kissed often, sweet kisses goodnight, passionate kisses after a good day's work, tender kisses for no reason at all except that they could. But Wyatt never pushed for more. Bea's reputation was already hanging by a thread in Randsburg. He would not do anything to compromise her further, no matter how much he wanted her. 3 weeks after he moved to her canyon, Bea finally broke the tension between them. It was evening, and they were sitting outside her cabin watching the stars emerge. Bea was pressed against Wyatt's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. It had become their favorite way to end the day, this simple closeness. "Wyatt," Bea said quietly, "I have been thinking." "Dangerous occupation." She poked him in the ribs, making him grunt. "I'm serious. I've been thinking about us, about what comes next." Wyatt's heart rate picked up. "What have you been thinking?" Bea sat up and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. In the fading light, her face was beautiful and earnest. "I have spent my whole life trying to prove I do not need anyone," she said, "that I can be independent and self-sufficient, and I can be those things. But I have realized that not needing someone is not the same as not wanting them. I want you, Wyatt. Not because I need rescuing or because I cannot manage alone. I want you because you make everything better. Work is better with you. Meals are better with you. The whole world is better with you in it." Wyatt felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I feel the same way about you." "Then I have a question for you." Bea took a deep breath. "Would you marry me? A real marriage? A partnership? We could combine our claims, work them together, build something together. I know it is forward of me to ask, and I know people will talk even more than they already do, but I do not care anymore what they think. I only care what you think." For a moment, Wyatt could not speak. Then he started laughing, a deep, joyful sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Bea looked confused until he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch. From it, he extracted a ring, simple silver, handcrafted, with a small piece of polished turquoise set in it. "I have been carrying this around for a week," Wyatt admitted. "I made it myself from ore I mined. I've been trying to figure out the right way to ask you, and here you beat me to it." Now Bea was laughing too, tears streaming down her face. Is that a yes? That's absolutely a yes. Wyatt slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Beatrice Lawson, I would be honored to marry you, to be your partner in every way that matters. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I love you too, Bea whispered. Then she was kissing him, and he was pulling her into his lap, and for a long time there was nothing but the two of them and the desert stars, and the feeling of having found home in another person. They made the trip to Randsburg 2 days later, riding side by side down the mountain. This time, Bea wore a dress, a simple calico print that she had carefully preserved from her old life. She had plaited her hair and pinned it up, though tendrils escaped around her face in the wind. She looked beautiful and feminine, and also deeply uncomfortable. I feel like I'm wearing a costume, she muttered as they entered the town. You look lovely, Wyatt assured her, but you would look just as lovely in your regular clothes. This is for them, not for me. They went directly to the small church at the end of the main street. The preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Hall, listened to their request with raised eyebrows. You want to be married today? He asked. Yes, sir, Wyatt replied. We have the money for the license and your services. We have 2 witnesses if we need them. He gestured to the church caretaker and his wife, who happened to be cleaning. Reverend Hall studied them both, taking in Wyatt's earnest expression and Bea's determined one. Finally, he smiled. I have heard talk about you, Miss Lawson, about how you dress and how you work. People have been unkind. Bea's chin came up. Yes, sir, they have. Well, I think they are fools, the Reverend said bluntly. I knew your father. He was a good man, and he clearly raised you to be strong and capable. Any man lucky enough to win your heart should count himself blessed. Bea looked startled, then grateful. Thank you, Reverend. As for you, Mr. Garrison, I have seen you around town. You are a man of few words but good character. Do you love this woman? With everything I have, Wyatt said simply. And you, Miss Lawson? Do you love this man? I do, Bea said. He sees who I really am and loves me for it, not in spite of it. The Reverend nodded, satisfied. Then let us make this official. The ceremony was simple and brief. They exchanged vows in the small church, their voices steady and sure. When Reverend Hall pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed Bea with such tenderness that the caretaker's wife wiped her eyes. They signed the license, paid the Reverend, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Garrison. That is it, Bea said, looking down at the ring on her finger with wonder. We are married. That's it, Wyatt agreed. He pulled her close and kissed her again, right there on the church steps, not caring who saw. You are mine now, and I am yours. They made one more stop in town at the land office, where they officially combined their mining claims into one property under both their names. The clerk gave Bea a disapproving look when he saw her name on the documents, but Wyatt's hard stare cut off any comments he might have made. As they rode out of Randsburg for the last time that day, Bea looked over at Wyatt. They are going to talk, she said, about how I trapped you or how you married a woman who acts like a man. Let them talk, Wyatt replied. I do not care what they say. I know the truth. I married the strongest, bravest, most wonderful woman in California, and I am the luckiest man alive. Bea smiled, the happiness on her face outshining the desert sun. Take me home, husband. Gladly, wife. That night, in the privacy of the cabin that was now theirs together, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Wyatt worshipped every inch of Bea's body, treating her with reverence while also unleashing the desire they had both been holding back. Bea, despite her inexperience, matched him with her own fierce need, her own way of claiming him as surely as he claimed her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow cot, sweaty and satisfied and overwhelmed with happiness. I never thought I could have this, Bea whispered against Wyatt's chest. Someone who truly loves me, someone I can trust completely. You can have it, Wyatt murmured into her hair. You can have me for as long as we both live. I am not going anywhere. Good, Bea said, because I am keeping you. Wyatt chuckled and pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. Outside, the desert wind sang through the canyon, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled at the moon. But inside their small cabin, there was warmth and peace and love enough to last a lifetime. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Wyatt's life. He and Bea worked their combined claim with skill and determination, and their efforts began to pay off. They hit a major silver vein in December, one that ran deep and rich into the mountain. Suddenly, they were not just surviving, but thriving. They hired 2 workers from Randsburg to help with the heavy labor, men who did not care that their boss was a woman in trousers as long as they got paid fairly. Wyatt built an addition onto the cabin, doubling its size and adding a real bedroom, a larger kitchen, and a sitting area with a stone fireplace he constructed himself. Bea filled it with small comforts curtains for the windows, rugs for the floors, books for the shelves. It became a real home, a testament to their partnership and love. They still faced prejudice when they went to town. People whispered about Bea, called her unnatural and unwomanly. But Wyatt noticed something changing. Some of the women, particularly the younger ones, began to look at Bea differently, not with contempt but with curiosity, maybe even envy. Here was a woman who lived on her own terms, who worked alongside her husband as an equal, who did not apologize for being strong. One day, in March of 1879, a young woman approached Bea at the general store. Hutchins had retired, and the new owner was more interested in money than morality, so Bea shopped there without incident now. "Mrs. Garrison?" the woman said hesitantly. She was perhaps 19, with a round face and anxious eyes. "May I speak with you?" "Of course," Bea replied. The young woman glanced around nervously, then leaned in. "My name is Sarah Miller. I wanted to ask you about your claim, about how you work it. My father left me his property when he died, but my brothers say a woman cannot run a mining operation. They want me to sell it and give them the money." Bea's eyes sharpened with interest and sympathy. "Do you want to sell it?" "No," Sarah said fiercely. "I want to work it like my father did, but I do not know how, and no one will teach me." Bea looked at the young woman for a long moment, seeing her own past reflected back. Then she smiled. "Come to our place next week," she said. "I will teach you what I know. Bring your tools and your questions." Sarah's face lit up with hope and gratitude. "Really? You would do that?" "Someone helped me when I needed it," Bea said, glancing at Wyatt, who had joined her with his arms full of supplies. "It is time I passed that on." Sarah became the first of several young women who came to Bea for help and advice. Word spread quietly through the mining camps and small settlements that Mrs. Garrison would teach women who wanted to learn. Some came to understand mining so they could work their own claims. Others came just to see proof that a woman could live differently, could choose strength and independence over convention. Wyatt watched his wife become a teacher and mentor with pride and love. She was changing things slowly but surely, showing people that a woman could be capable and strong without being any less of a woman. She walked like she knew her own power, and in doing so, she gave other women permission to find theirs. In August of 1879, Bea told Wyatt she was pregnant. They were sitting at their dinner table, the summer heat making the evening air thick and close. Bea had been quieter than usual all day, and Wyatt had been worried. "Are you sick?" he asked when she pushed away her plate, barely touched. "Not exactly," Bea said. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I'm with child. The baby should come in February, I think." Wyatt stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then joy flooded through him so powerfully he could hardly breathe. "We are having a baby?" he managed. "We are having a baby," Bea confirmed. There were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Wyatt stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. "I'm overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. You are going to be a mother. I'm going to be a father. We are going to have a family." He set her down gently, suddenly afraid he had hurt her, but Bea just laughed. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. You can still hug me." "I am going to hug you every day for the rest of our lives," Wyatt promised. He knelt down and pressed a kiss to her stomach, overwhelmed with emotion. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I already love you more than I knew was possible." Bea ran her fingers through Wyatt's hair, her expression soft with love. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other and marveling at the miracle growing between them. The pregnancy was not easy. Bea had rough mornings and grew tired more quickly than she was used to. She hated having to slow down. to accept limitations she had never dealt with before. But Wyatt was patient and supportive, taking over the heavier work and making sure she rested when she needed to. He also refused to let her feel guilty about it. "You are growing a person," he reminded her whenever she got frustrated. "That is harder than hauling ore." By December, Bee's belly was round and prominent, and she had finally accepted that she could not wear her work trousers anymore. She wore loose dresses instead, though she still supervised the mining operation with her usual sharp eye. Wyatt had hired more workers, and the claim was producing steadily. They had money saved now, enough to provide comfortably for their growing family. In January, Wyatt made a trip to Los Angeles to purchase supplies for the baby, a proper cradle, soft blankets, tiny clothes. He also bought Bea a rocking chair, which he installed by their fireplace. She pretended to scoff at it, but spent every evening rocking gently, her hands on her belly, humming songs her mother had taught her. The baby came on a cold February night in 1880, 2 years almost to the day after Wyatt and Bea first met. The labor was long and difficult, and Wyatt was nearly out of his mind with worry. They had a midwife from Randsburg staying with them, a competent woman named Mrs. Fletcher, but Wyatt still paced the cabin like a caged animal, flinching every time Bea cried out in pain. Finally, just as dawn was breaking over the mountains, a baby's cry pierced the air. Wyatt rushed to the bedroom and found Mrs. Fletcher cleaning off a squalling infant. "You have a son," the midwife said, smiling. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Wyatt looked past her to Bea, who was pale and exhausted but smiling. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything else fell away. "Come meet your son," Bea said softly. Wyatt approached the bed carefully, as if afraid he might break the spell. Mrs. Fletcher placed the baby in his arms, and Wyatt looked down at the tiny red-faced creature he had helped create. The baby had dark hair and blue eyes, and when Wyatt touched his miniature hand, the infant's fingers curled around his finger with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Wyatt breathed. "You did so well, Bea. You are amazing." "We did well," Bea corrected. "He is ours." They named him William, after Wyatt's father, with the middle name James, after Bea's father. He was a calm baby, content to sleep in his cradle or be carried in a sling on Bea's back while she worked. Wyatt was besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or making silly faces to earn a toothless smile. Fatherhood changed Wyatt in subtle ways. He became even more protective, more conscious of building something lasting. He worked harder than ever, not just for himself and Bea, but for William's future. And he made sure to tell his son every single day that he was loved and wanted. Bea proved to be a wonderful mother, balancing her work with caring for William in a way that seemed effortless, but Wyatt knew required enormous strength. She nursed him, sang to him, taught him about rocks and stars and all the things she loved. And she never let motherhood define her completely. She was still a miner, still a teacher, still herself. When William was 3 months old, Sarah Miller came to visit with news that she had successfully worked her claim and hit a decent copper vein. Her brothers had been forced to admit she knew what she was doing. She brought a gift for the baby, a small quilt she had sewn herself, and tears in her eyes as she thanked Bea again for believing in her. "You changed my life," Sarah said. "You showed me I could do more than I thought possible." "You did that yourself," Bea replied. "I just gave you a little push." As the years passed, Wyatt and Bea's family grew. A daughter arrived in 1882, whom they named Catherine after Bea's mother. She had her mother's hazel eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Then another son in 1884, Thomas, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. Their cabin grew to accommodate them, expanding into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a wide porch. The mining claim continued to produce well, providing more than enough income to support their family comfortably. Wyatt and Bea became respected figures in the region, known for their fair dealings and their willingness to help others. The gossip about Bea's unconventional ways never entirely disappeared, but it faded into the background, overwhelmed by the evidence of what she and Wyatt had built together. Bea continued to mentor young women, teaching them mining skills and also simply showing them that they had choices. Some of them went on to work claims of their own. Others used the confidence they gained to pursue different paths, becoming teachers, opening businesses, choosing their own husbands instead of accepting whoever asked. Bea never took credit for their success, but Wyatt knew she was changing the world in small, important ways. The children grew up healthy and strong, raised with their mother's intelligence and their father's steady strength. William showed an early aptitude for geology, already able to identify different rock types by the time he was 6. Catherine was fearless and wild, always climbing trees and exploring canyons. Thomas was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing the mountains and desert plants. Wyatt taught all 3 children to ride, to shoot, to survive in the wilderness. Bea taught them to read and write, to think critically, to question assumptions. Together, they raised children who were confident, capable, and kind, who understood that strength came in many forms and that love was the foundation of everything. One evening in the summer of 1889, when William was 9, Catherine 7, and Thomas 5, the family sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The children were playing a game with stones, their laughter ringing through the canyon. Bea sat in her rocking chair, mending one of Thomas's shirts. Wyatt sat beside her, carving a small wooden horse for Catherine's birthday. "Do you ever think about how different your life would have been if we had not met?" Bea asked quietly. Wyatt set down his carving and reached for her hand. "I try not to. I cannot imagine any life better than this one." "People still talk sometimes, you know," Bea said, "about how I walked like a man, about how I was improper." "Let them talk," Wyatt replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "You walked exactly as you needed to. You walked into town looking for supplies and a fresh start. You walked into my life and changed everything." He smiled. "You walked right into my heart just fine, and you have been there ever since." Bea squeezed his hand, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I love you, Wyatt Garrison, more now than even on the day I married you. I love you too, Beatrice Garrison, my brave, strong, beautiful wife." They sat together as the sun slipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, their children's laughter the sweetest music Wyatt had ever heard. He thought about the mountain man he had been 11 years ago, solitary, guarded, convinced he was meant to live alone. And he thought about the woman who had changed all that, who had shown him that love was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. As the years continued to unfold, their love only deepened. They weathered challenges together, dry seasons that threatened their water supply, economic downturns that affected mining prices, illnesses that required care and patience. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, facing every problem as a team and finding solutions together. Their children grew into remarkable young people. William went on to study geology formally, eventually working for the United States Geological Survey and making significant discoveries about mineral deposits in the Western Territories. He often credited his mother with giving him his love of rocks and his father with teaching him the value of hard work. Catherine shocked everyone by becoming one of the first female physicians in California, driven by her memories of watching her mother help injured miners and her desire to do more. She was fierce and brilliant, respected by her peers despite the barriers she had to overcome. She married a fellow doctor she met in medical school, and together they opened a clinic that served mining communities throughout the region. Thomas became an artist whose paintings of the Western landscape gained recognition throughout the country. His works captured the harsh beauty of the desert and mountains where he had grown up, and critics praised his ability to show both the power and vulnerability of the wilderness. He never married, preferring his solitary life in a studio he built near his parents' home, but he was happy and fulfilled in his art. Wyatt and Bea took enormous pride in their children's accomplishments, though they were careful never to claim credit. They had simply loved their children, supported their dreams, and shown them by example what a real partnership looked like. As they grew older, they scaled back their mining operations, eventually selling most of the claim to a mining company while retaining enough land to keep their home and a small operation for supplemental income. They had more than enough money saved to live comfortably, and they chose to spend their later years simply enjoying each other's company. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children organized a celebration at the house. The gathering included not just family, but also many of the women Bea had mentored over the years, along with their families. There were miners Wyatt had worked with, neighbors they had helped, and friends from Randsburg who had long since stopped caring about how Bea dressed or walked. Sarah Miller was there with her husband and 4 children, still working her father's claim successfully. She stood to give a toast, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Most of you know that Mrs. Garrison taught me how to work a mining claim 30 years ago, when everyone else told me it was impossible for a woman. But what you might not know is that she taught me something more important than mining techniques. She taught me that I got to decide who I was going to be, that I did not have to accept other people's limitations. She walked into town wearing trousers and boots, and people criticized her. They said she walked like a man, as if that was the worst thing they could say. But Mr. Garrison saw the truth. He saw that she walked with strength and purpose and courage. He saw that she walked right into his heart, and lucky for all of us, she has been walking that same brave path ever since, showing the rest of us it was possible. The crowd applauded, many wiping away tears. Wyatt looked at Bea and saw her cheeks were wet, though she was smiling. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone, not caring that they were 70 and too old for public displays. They had never cared what people thought, and they were not about to start now. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Wyatt and Bea sat on their porch under the stars, just as they had done countless times before. Bea's hair was silver now, and Wyatt's face was lined with wrinkles earned from years of outdoor work and laughter. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been 30 years ago, the lonely mountain man and the brave woman in trousers who had found each other against all odds. "Do you have any regrets?" Bea asked, her head resting on Wyatt's shoulder. "Not a single one," Wyatt replied honestly. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner." Bea turned to look up at him. "But then again, maybe we needed to become who we were first before we could find each other." "Maybe so," Wyatt agreed. He kissed her forehead tenderly. "I would not change anything about our story. Not the hard parts, not the criticism you faced, not the struggles we went through. All of it led us here, to this life we built together." "A good life," Bea murmured. "The best life," Wyatt corrected. "The very best." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars wheel slowly across the desert sky. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the wind whispered through the canyon, just as it had for decades. This place had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, the birth of their children, and all the joys and sorrows in between. It had been the backdrop to their love story, wild and beautiful and unforgiving, demanding everything they had to give, and rewarding them with more than they had ever dreamed possible. Wyatt thought back to that September day in 1878, when he had first seen Bea walking down Randsburg's main street, her stride confident, despite the criticism that swirled around her like dust. He had not known then that his entire life was about to change, that he was seeing his future, walking toward him with purpose and determination. He had not known that love could be like this, steady and fierce, gentle and passionate, a partnership built on respect and trust as much as attraction. But he knew it now. He had lived it every day for 30 years, and he would live it for however many more years they had together. Because Beatrice Lawson Garrison had walked right into his heart that day, and she had never left. She had claimed that space with her strength and her stubbornness and her enormous capacity for love, and Wyatt had been grateful for it every single day since. "I love you," he whispered into her silver hair. "I love you too," Bea replied. "Always have, always will." They stayed on the porch until the moon rose high and the night grew cool, unwilling to let go of the moment, of each other, of the life they had built together in their canyon among the mountains. Two people who had been told they did not fit the mold, who had been criticized and judged, but who had found in each other perfect acceptance and perfect love. The criticism did not matter. The gossip did not matter. All that mattered was this: they had found each other, they had chosen each other, and they had built a life together that was richer and fuller than anything either had imagined possible. She had walked like a man, the townspeople had said, meaning it as an insult. But Wyatt had seen the truth. She had walked like someone who knew her own worth, like someone who refused to be diminished by other people's small-mindedness. She had walked with purpose and courage and strength. And she had walked right into his heart just fine, where she would remain for all the days of his life and beyond, into whatever came after, because some love is too strong to be bounded by time or mortality. Some love simply is, eternal and unshakable, the foundation upon which everything else is built. As the years continued to pass, Wyatt and Bea grew old together with grace and dignity. They celebrated grandchildren born to William and Catherine, delighting in a new generation that carried forward their legacy of strength and independence. They watched Thomas's career flourish, his paintings displayed in galleries from San Francisco to New York. They continued to live in their mountain canyon, in the house that had grown and changed with their family, surrounded by memories of a life well lived. When Wyatt was 78, he fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Bea nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything in her life, refusing to let him slip away. She sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, reminding him of all the reasons he had to stay. "You cannot leave me yet," she told him one night when his fever was particularly high. "We still have more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to meet, more years to spend together. I am not ready to say goodbye, Wyatt Garrison, and I do not think you are either." Wyatt, swimming in and out of consciousness, squeezed her hand weakly. "Never ready," he managed. "Could spend forever with you, and it would not be enough." "Then get better," Bea commanded, tears streaming down her face. "Get better and come back to me." And somehow, whether through sheer force of will or divine intervention or simply the power of their love, Wyatt did get better. It took weeks, but the fever broke, his strength returned, and he found himself still in the world, still with the woman he loved. The doctors said it was a miracle. Wyatt said it was Bea, which was the same thing as far as he was concerned. They had 5 more good years together after that, years they both treasured with the knowledge that they were borrowed time, precious beyond measure. They took long walks through their canyon, moving more slowly than they once had, but still together, still hand in hand. They sat on their porch for hours, sometimes talking, and sometimes just being together in comfortable silence. They told their grandchildren stories about the early days, about riding into Randsburg when it was still rough and wild, about building their first cabin and working the claims and falling in love against all odds. On a warm summer evening in 1917, just after their 38th wedding anniversary, Bea passed away peacefully in her sleep, Wyatt's arms around her as they had been for nearly 4 decades. She was 82 years old, and she died as she had lived on her own terms, without fuss or fanfare, simply slipping from one state to another as naturally as breathing. Wyatt woke to find her gone, her face peaceful, her hand still in his. The grief that crashed over him was overwhelming, threatening to drown him. His Bea, his partner, his love gone. The world suddenly seemed impossibly large and empty without her in it. But even in his grief, Wyatt found gratitude. They had had 38 years together, which was more than many people got. They had built a life, raised children, loved each other through everything. She had not suffered at the end, had not lingered in pain or confusion. She had simply closed her eyes and let go, trusting that wherever she was going, he would follow when his time came. Wyatt lived another 2 years, cared for by his children and surrounded by his grandchildren. He remained in the house he and Bea had built together, unable to imagine living anywhere else. Every evening, he sat on the porch in his chair, Bea's empty chair beside him, and talked to her as if she were still there. He told her about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about Thomas's latest painting, about how beautiful the sunset was that evening. Sometimes he imagined he could hear her voice on the wind, feel her presence beside him. On a cool autumn night in 1919, Wyatt Garrison passed away, in the same bed where he had slept with Bea for nearly 40 years. He was 80 years old. His children found him the next morning, a peaceful expression on his weathered face, his hand stretched out as if reaching for someone only he could see. They buried Wyatt next to Bea on a hillside overlooking their canyon, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The entire community came to the funeral, their children and grandchildren, the people they had helped over the years, the women Bea had mentored, miners and ranchers and townspeople who had known them for decades. There were easily 200 people gathered on that hillside, all there to honor the mountain man and the woman who had walked right into his heart. William gave the eulogy, his voice strong despite his tears. "My father once told me that the day he met my mother, he thought she was the bravest person he had ever seen. She walked into town wearing trousers and boots, facing criticism and judgment, and she never wavered. People said she walked like a man, as if that was something shameful. But my father saw the truth. He saw that she walked with courage and integrity. He saw that she was exactly the partner he needed, and he spent the rest of his life proving to her that he was worthy of her love. William paused, wiping his eyes. They built something beautiful together. Not just a successful mining operation or this house or even us, their children. They built a partnership based on mutual respect and love. They showed everyone who knew them that two people could stand together as equals, supporting and challenging each other, making each other stronger. That is their legacy, and it will live on long after we are all gone. The crowd murmured agreement. Catherine stepped forward to place wildflowers on both graves, the desert blooms Bea had always loved, tough and beautiful and resilient. Thomas hung a small painting he had made of his parents, sitting on their porch, watching the sunset, eternally together. As the sun set over the mountains that evening, casting long shadows across the canyon, the gathered mourners began to disperse. But many of them paused on their way down the hill to look back at the two graves side by side, already imagining the matching headstones that would soon mark the spot. The headstones, when they were finally placed, were simple granite markers with plain inscriptions: Wyatt James Garrison, 1839-1919, beloved husband, father, and friend. He saw her heart, Beatrice Lawson, Garrison, 1835-1917, beloved wife, mother, and pioneer. She walked her own path over the years. Their story became legend in the region. People told tales of the mountain man and the woman in trousers who had defied convention and built an empire together. The details changed, with each telling. Sometimes Bea was described as beautiful as a sunrise, sometimes as tough as nails. Sometimes Wyatt was portrayed as a gentle giant, sometimes as fierce as a grizzly. But the core of the story remained true. Two people had found each other in the wilderness, had recognized each other's worth, and had chosen to walk through life together as partners and equals. Their house remained standing for many years, eventually turned into a museum by their grandchildren to preserve the legacy of early mining in California, and to honor the unconventional woman who had helped shape it. Visitors walked through the rooms where Wyatt and Bea had lived and loved, saw the tools they had used, read the journals Bea had kept detailing her work and her thoughts. They looked at photographs of the couple, Wyatt tall and muscular, with long hair and steady eyes, Bea in her practical clothes, her expression intelligent and determined, and they tried to imagine what it must have been like to love so completely in such a harsh and unforgiving place. The mine itself eventually played out, as all mines do, but the land remained beautiful. The canyon still caught the light at sunset in breathtaking ways. The wind still whispered through the sage and Joshua trees. And on the hillside overlooking it all, two graves stood side by side, marking the resting place of two people who had loved each other beyond measure and beyond judgment, who had built something lasting not just in the physical world but in the hearts of everyone who knew them. Their great-grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren after them grew up hearing stories about Wyatt and Bea. They learned that love came in many forms, that strength was not just physical, that the opinions of narrow-minded people mattered far less than staying true to yourself. They learned that a real partnership meant respecting each other's strengths and supporting each other's dreams. They learned that sometimes the greatest romance was found not in grand gestures, but in the daily choice to stand beside someone, to work together, to build a life that honored both people's gifts. The young girls in the family, especially, loved hearing about Bea. Here was a woman who had refused to be limited by other people's expectations, who had worked a mining claim in trousers when society said she should be home in skirts. She had been criticized and judged, but she had found someone who loved her for exactly who she was, someone who saw her strength as beautiful rather than shameful. It gave them permission to dream their own dreams, to imagine their own unconventional paths. And when those girls grew up and faced their own challenges, their own moments of doubt, they would remember the story. They would remember that Bea had walked into town with her head high, facing criticism with quiet dignity. They would remember that Wyatt had seen past convention to the woman herself, recognizing her worth when others saw only scandal. They would remember that real love meant accepting and celebrating each other, not trying to force each other into uncomfortable molds. The story of Wyatt and Bea Garrison became more than just a family legend. It became an inspiration, a reminder that love and respect could overcome prejudice, that two people supporting each other could accomplish far more than one person alone, that walking your own path was not just acceptable, but admirable. Their legacy lived on not in monuments or wealth, but in the lives they had touched, the example they had set, and the love they had shared so completely that it seemed to echo through the generations. In the canyon where they had built their home, where they had raised their children and worked their claim and grown old together, peace settled like a benediction. The house might be a museum now, the mine might be closed, but the essence of what Wyatt and Bea had created remained. It was in the very air, in the way the light fell across the canyon walls, in the whisper of the wind through the sage. Two souls had loved here, completely and without reservation, and that kind of love left an imprint that time could not erase. She had walked like a man, the critics had said, meaning to shame her. But Wyatt had known better. She had walked like a woman who knew her own mind, who refused to be diminished, who carried herself with the confidence of someone who understood her own worth. She had walked with purpose and courage and grace, and she had walked right into his heart where she belonged, where she would remain forever, long after both of them had returned to the dust from which they came. Their love story, born in the harsh beauty of the California desert, nurtured through years of hard work and partnership, and lasting until death and beyond, stood as proof that the greatest adventures were not found in conquering wilderness or striking it rich. The greatest adventures were found in finding another soul that complemented your own, in building a life together based on mutual respect and love, in facing the world side by side and refusing to let anyone tell you how your story should go. Wyatt and Beatrice Garrison had written their own story, and it was a love story for the ages, wild and tender, fierce and gentle, perfectly imperfect and imperfectly perfect. It was a story that began with a woman walking confidently down a dusty street and a mountain man who had the wisdom to see her heart. It was a story that unfolded in hard work and harder times, in joy and sorrow, in building and growing and loving. And it was a story that ended not with death, but with legacy, with children and grandchildren who carried forward the lessons learned from two remarkable people who had loved each other exactly right. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the criticism Bea had faced for her unconventional ways, not the gossip or the judgment or the narrow-minded disapproval. What mattered was that she had found someone who loved her for exactly who she was, someone who saw her strength as the gift it was, someone who chose every day to walk beside her as an equal partner. What mattered was that Wyatt had found someone who challenged him and inspired him, who filled his solitary life with laughter and love, who showed him that opening his heart was not weakness, but the greatest courage of all. They had lived, they had loved, and they had left the world better than they found it. Their graves on the hillside, side by side for eternity, were a testament to a love that had been strong enough to weather any storm, gentle enough to nurture children and dreams, and true enough to inspire generations. Under the vast California sky, in the shadow of the mountains they had both loved, Wyatt and Beatrice Garrison rested together, their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure in the hearts of all who heard their tale and dared to believe that love, real, honest, transformative love, was always possible if you had the courage to accept it when it walked into your life.